Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Now, for many decades, I've known the name of Rene Padilla ever since I was a student and known about his wonderful work in fighting injustice and poverty in South America. And yet, of course, because we live on different continents, I've never really had the privilege of meeting him. And so it's a great privilege this morning to welcome Rene Padilla, who is actually from, I think we can say from South America, because he's from a number of South American countries, presently living in Buenos Aires in Argentina, but also has lived in Ecuador and also in Colombia, also studied here in England, so has really had a very international experience in that respect, and has been involved now many decades in fighting poverty and injustice and in mobilizing, in fact, the churches of South America to be involved in this very important endeavor. And so we have someone to start us off this morning who's really engaged in practical, grassroots, we can say, environmental action, where it's really going to make a difference to countries and peoples and environments. I should also mention that Rene is the international president of Tear Fund, and he's also started up a number of different foundations to help in this work, including the Taurus Foundation, and he's also now president of the MICA Network, which is an action network to campaign and mobilizing Christians against poverty. So we're delighted he's going to start us off this morning and going to speak to us on caring for creation and the poor. Thank you very much, Rene.
You will find out what the pictures mean, because they represent a bit of what I'm going to talk about. When I got this subject, I was asked to speak on the question of ecology and poverty. I was amazed at the number of points at which these two concepts or realities meet. It's just amazing, really. Perhaps I should say that one of the most shocking experiences I have had in the last month or so is a strike by big landowners in Argentina. Can you imagine that? Usually it's the common workers who strike. In this case it was people who are very powerful, but who could control the economy of the country. They can control the economy of the country. And the problem was that the government raised the export tax on soybean exports. You see, the country is being turned into a monoculture or monocrop country. Argentina is one of the countries that produces the highest percentage of soybeans for the whole world. I think it's the second one. And it has made quite a bit of progress, if you can call it progress, in the use of GM. It's just amazing the number of tons that go out of the country. You know, about 15 million acres are dedicated to the cultivation of soybeans. Now, Argentina is a big country, very big. And perhaps, does this work? I should tell you a bit about what I intend to cover. These two problems. The global economic boom has accelerated greenhouse gas emissions to a dangerous threshold not expected for a decade and could potentially irreversible climate change. That is a scientist who works on the subject. He's from Australia. And then you know the name of Jimmy Carter. The greatest challenge we face in the growing is the growing chasm between the rich and the poor people on Earth. More than half the world's poor people live on less than $2 a day, and 1.2 billion people have to survive on half that amount. According to Leslie Clare, a British sociologist. What we have today is a global system, and we cannot really separate the question of the relationship between ecology and poverty from this problem of globalization. I know that there are people who say there are positive aspects to globalization. Well, I want to point to the negative aspects because they concern me and they concern many millions of people today. According to Leslie Clare, there are three elements that participate in globalization. The transnational corporation, the main locus of economic practices, the transnational capitalist class, major locus of political practices, and the transnational culture ideology of consumerism. Now, I take this as an example of that, because I think it's very paradigmatic, the soybean business. You may not be very much acquainted with it because, well, you live somewhere else. I live in the middle of it. I want to use a study case of soybean industry and then show you the way in which this illustrates what I call the rescue or the resource curse. Then we will take a look at the ecology and poverty and theological perspective with all these aspects. Okay? Now the soybean industry, a case study. There are several contributing factors to the development of soybean production in Argentina. One is that for the first time we have introduced modern agriculture. Agriculture has become very modern. And you see the big machine there is doing deforestation. On this side you find nature as it is, so to say. You know, it's millions of acres in Argentina that have gone through that process. Now, who was living there? Who were living there? Indigenous people. Indigenous people. They lived on the basis of hunting and fishing. And that was it. Now, the landowners, they are owners because somebody gave them the deed, the title, without consulting with the owners of the land, the original owners of the land. And so they go wild about deforestation. And you know the new methods of sowing today with deforestation and then the process of spreading seed from the air and fumigation. Now, what are the negative consequences to this? Well, there are ecological consequences. On the one hand, you find the tremendous deforestation, which is a serious problem and very much related to earth warming, climate change, very much so. This kind of deforestation is going on all over, including, of course, the Amazon jungles. Hundreds and thousands of acres are being deforested for the cultivation of, usually in Latin America, soybeans. Now, I must tell you this. Out of all the production of soybean in Argentina, 95% go out of the country, mostly to China, to feed pigs. 5% stay in the country. Argentinians eat usually beef, fruit, vegetables, and a lot of pasta, because a lot of people have an Italian origin. They don't consume much in the terms of beans, soybeans. the ecological consequences are not only in terms of deforestation, also in relation to the use of pesticides, all kinds of pesticides. And then the social consequences. An awful lot of people remain now without any possibility to sustain themselves. There's no work. You know, if people did have a plot of land, a piece of land, well, for the cultivation of soybeans, you have to have at least 100 acres. There is less than that, it's not productive enough. So a lot of the peasants and the Aboriginal people are selling their land, selling their land, selling their land. What do peasants do without land? I was in Mexico a couple of years ago. I met with representatives of 6 rural communities. I was supposed to talk about integral mission, the importance of combining the proclamation of the gospel of Jesus Christ with action on behalf of people who oftentimes are unable to cover their basic needs. I asked them, what problems do you have in this area? They said, we are losing our land. Why are you losing your land? Well, we cannot compete with beans that come from the US, corn that comes from the US. Because the corn that comes from the US is subsidized. Big corporations get the subsidy. Then they pour corn into Mexico. You know, if you go to Mexico, you eat corn and more corn and more corn in many ways, prepared in many, many ways. It's like rice in some countries. There is no possibility for people to live without corn. They lose their land. And so, what do they do with their land? Well, goes to the city, big city of Mexico, almost 30 million today. 30 million. How can they find work? There's no work. So they go up to the US to try to cross the border. And they become, many of them, illegal immigrants. And if you know the situation of illegal immigrants in the US, you know what I'm talking about. They are chased as if they were criminals. Social consequences. There is growing poverty in Argentina. Argentina is a wealthy country. It has a lot of resources. It has wonderful land. It has been a meat-producing country. It has exported tons and tons and tons of wheat to Europe, to other countries. Nowadays, soybeans. So the government tries to control that and say, okay, we're going to try to control this. And there is a fight. And the fight is going on right now. The whole problem has been taken to Congress for the Congress to decide what to do. I call that a resource curse. And it applies to all kinds of natural resources. All kinds of natural resources. You know, most of the countries in Latin America are very, very wealthy in terms of natural resources. Minerals, lots of water, oil, petroleum. You know, why are these countries in such a dire situation? Oftentimes with so many people who are unable to cover their basic needs. This is Argentina, a big country, the third in size in Latin America. This is the area that has been studied very carefully It's a phenomenological study by someone who wrote a doctoral thesis at the University of Salta, Anta, up in the north. This is what is going on there. All the time, all the time. There is not much left in terms of forests anymore. Within who knows what, how much time. But in a short time, there will be any forest like that left in that area. Deforestation, all kinds of pesticides, and the modern way of doing agriculture. And this is the consequence. I mean, this is a little sign of what is going on. People who are left without any means to sustain themselves. I do believe that we have to take a look at the whole problem from a theological perspective. And now, much of what is going on in terms of transforming the country into a monocrop country, it has to do with the concept of the state. I don't know whether you are acquainted with this term. I'm sure you are. Neoliberal. The neoliberal ideology that says, you know, the state exists to promote investments, to protect private property, to encourage production, to ensure free market operation. That's it. That is the duty of the state. It must not relate to economic issues. It must not try to control the economy, so to say. It must not have anything to do with the economic relationships. Why? Because the market takes care of that. The market takes care of that. What is the concept of the state from a biblical perspective? To begin with, I think you can easily show that in Scripture, oppression is the main cause of poverty. I want to underline main. I'm not saying it's the only one reason. There are many reasons why poor people are poor. It's amazing, I don't know whether this is true in Britain. I lived in the US for over 6 years. Oftentimes I've heard this, poor people are poor because they are lazy. Oh yeah? I've seen people who are very, very, very poor and very, very hardworking. The problem is oppression, related to injustice, exploitation, abuse of power. I grew up in a poor home, and I know what it means to have parents who work and work and work and work and have a hard time meeting the needs. I know that. So, I think this synthesizes what I'm trying to say. Brian Myers wrote a book that to me is a very good summary of all the research that has been done into the question of poverty. He studies various theories on poverty, and this is his conclusion. Poverty is the result of relationships that do not work, that are not just, that are not for life, that are not harmonious or enjoyable. Poverty is the absence of shalom in all its meanings. I believe that that is very much the conclusion we have to come to on the basis of what we observe, not only in Latin America, all over the world. Now, what is the concept of the state from a biblical perspective? It begins with the assumption that God is a God of justice. Justice and righteousness are inherent to God's character. And I love this quotation from Heschel. Heschel wrote a 3-volume book on the prophets of the Old Testament. a Jewish scholar. This is not an inference, but a priori of biblical faith, self-evident, not an attribute added to his essence, but belonging to the idea of God. It is inherent to his essence and is identified with his ways. God is a God of justice. It's amazing the number of times in which the Old Testament refers to God as a God of justice. He is a just God. He loves justice and he demands justice. This is the theological perspective. We have seen that. What a contrast. The state is in charge to protect the rich, to protect private property. There is no concept of responsibility before someone who is above the state. Now, there is a relationship between justice and peace. There's no time to elaborate the topic. But you know, one of the basic key concepts in the Old Testament is the concept of shalom, peace. Shalom is not just the absence of conflict. It's far more than that. To be at peace with God, at peace with one's neighbor, at peace with creation. And the assumption is that there is justice, then there's peace. If there's no justice, there's no peace. And you know that in your own experience. If someone is abusing power, he or she cannot expect peace in any sense. There will be conflict, lack of harmony. God's righteousness provides the basis for the redistribution of social, economic, and political power in society for the sake of shalom, abundance of life for every human being. From a biblical perspective, all human beings are on the same level. All human beings have been made in the image of God. All human beings have the same rights. Someone has written quite a lot on this subject, and that is Brueggemann. Brueggemann says this is the summary of Old Testament ethics. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness. I think a better translation would be solidarity, to love solidarity, and to walk humbly with your God. That is the summary of Old Testament ethics. Now, from a biblical perspective, and especially, of course, you can elaborate the whole concept of the state on the basis of Old Testament teaching. The central task of the rulers of Israel is to implement God's justice for the sake of peace. And I love this Psalm 72, where you see the relationship between justice and the powers that be. And then the consequence of that, or the relationship of that with peace, not only in the sense of peace with God and peace with one's neighbor, but also shalom. It could be sometimes translated as prosperity, material well-being, the idea that there is fullness of life. Everything is in place, so to say. Give the king your justice, O God. It's a prayer. And your righteousness to the king's son. May he judge your people with righteousness, and your poor with justice. May the mountain yield prosperity for the people in the hills, and righteousness May He defend the cause of the poor people, of the poor of the people. Give deliverance to the needy, and crush the oppressor. The last phrase is not very attractive to people who side with the oppressor. Crush the oppressor. In the Old Testament, God takes the side of the poor. So, there is my conclusion. Consumerism is the root cause of the ecological collapse and poverty, fostered by corruption on a global scale. I do believe that the main problem, not the only problem, the main problem behind the ecological disaster, including climate change and poverty, is that power has been concentrated in a few hands. The corporations rule the world. They really do. The soybean industry is just an example of that. So in Latin America we have millions of acres now owned by big corporations that dedicate that land to the cultivation of soybeans or to the petroleum industry or some kind of minerals industry. And there's no way to change the situation unless there is somehow a change of heart. And the idea that everyone is responsible to see that well-being, fullness of life is available to everyone. From a Christian perspective, there is a call to repentance placed together with the good news of the kingdom of God. The time has come. The kingdom of God is near. Repent and believe the good news. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rene. Well, we've got plenty of time for questions and discussion now, so I hope we'll have a good time of discussion and perhaps get into the question of how to tackle some of these problems. So I hope everyone here will feel very free to chip in, make a comment, or to ask a question, and it's over to you. So who wants to kick us off? Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Rene, how did Argentina become a monocrop state in that sense? How did that develop? What were the factors that went from a mixed? Is it just transnational corporations, or are there other factors? How does that?
I must say that to me, Claire is right in saying that there is a transnational class. Transnational class. That includes not only foreign interests. You know, I didn't even mention Monsanto, Cargill. They have an awful lot of power in Argentina. But there is an internal problem with big landowners. Some of them got their titles many years ago. You know, their leads on the land. In fact, one of the most necessary things in Latin America, all over Latin America, is land reform. How did you get to have so many thousands and thousands and thousands of acres? Where did you get it? Now, big landowners are interested in money, and that is the main concern. Money, 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 money. To maximize the product, to maximize the income, you find the best kind of investment you can make. And right now, the best investment in Argentina is soybeans. The soybean industry has grown by leaps and bounds. The soybean price keeps rising up, increasing. That's the way Argentina is becoming a soybean producer. You know, as if nothing else matters. And the government has been trying to say, okay, let's control this. because people within the country need to eat. And they don't need soybeans. They need vegetables, they need wheat, they need other things. You see? But then you have the fight.
Yes, question.
Maybe you could explain a little bit more about the influence of the soybean industry on the economy of Argentina. In other words, you have an amazing export industry. Yes,
Yeah.
you said 90% of soya is exported. So how, I mean, usually when a country exports, that's good for the country. It brings in revenues, the revenues can be distributed, and so what happens further down the chain?
Yeah, that's precisely the point, you see. The government says, now, if we are going to export beans, let's make sure that the benefit is not just for the big owners, that somehow that benefits the whole population. We have money for education, for health, and so on. So that's why the raise and the increase in the export taxes. It makes sense to me. It really makes sense to me. But the big landowners say, well, why should we be supporting the country? Wait a minute. You know, in a way, the biblical concept of land is really so tremendous. And this is a concept that is very much related to the concept that many Aboriginal people have. The land doesn't really belong to anybody. It's a common. It's something that should benefit everybody. Now, there has been, of course, quite a bit of income because of the exports of beans so far, soybeans. But it's not the only income the country has. In fact, the industry produces a higher income in Argentina. It's a pretty, you know, it's not at the level of Britain or the US, but it's an industrialized country in many ways. We have about, 6, 7 trademarks of cars. It's a big problem, of course, because of the contamination of the air. But a lot of the cars that are produced in Argentina are exported all over, including the US. So the agricultural industry is not the only industry, but it has the potential to bring in much more income for the benefit of the country. And not just for a group of people, you see, a sector of society. We're very powerful.
Yes, just as a follow-up question then. What you described is a real clash. Yes? But let's say that there was economic reform in Argentina. All the masses of money that are made in exporting this cash crop to the rest of the world is distributed far more equally amongst everybody. Better health system, better education system, more jobs, more work. It doesn't solve the problem that you've related to, which is the land problem and the use of a monoculture and the destruction of the forest. Because, I mean, just hypothetically, if the government could, really utilize that resource for the benefit of the people, it would probably promote greater destruction of the forests, because then we would be able to get more soya and therefore help the poor people even more, and it escalates that way. I mean, it's a...
But you see, what the government is saying is, let's not use all the land to grow soybeans. Let's use it also for vegetables, for wheat, for all kinds of cereals, vegetables, and basically, I would say, the present government is also neoliberal. It's also neoliberal. That is also, in a way, not really going all the way to say, let's take care of ecological side of things. But it is saying, let's have some kind of redistribution of the income. That far it goes. It's not all that I wish, but it's at least something facing one of the problems. You see, Argentina has no reasons to have people dying of hunger, but there are people dying of hunger. There's no reason for that. A food-producing country. But last year we had about 30 people who died of hunger. Makes no sense whatever. Makes no sense whatever.
Yes.
I wonder if I could please consider your final conclusion, which is consumerism is the root cause of the ecological collapse and poverty fostered by corruption on a global scale. I'm sure the case for the people of Argentina is very strong. I don't doubt that. But you did say that a large part of the soybeans went to China. Now, I'm sure they don't just put those in the mine. In fact, they will go to China because China is a very large country with a very large population, 1 billion or more, and they have to feed those people.
Yeah.
So, to say that consumerism is the root cause of an economic collapse, when in fact, in one part of the world, in this case it happens to be Argentina, food is produced, it goes to feed people who would be in poverty in another part of the country. Now, of course, the mechanism of doing that may not be the most efficient. People in the middle are taking a resource, but to say that consumerism per se, which is what you're saying, it seems to me is a very hard thing to justify. I think if you looked at Western societies, our own society, for example, or the United States, I think you would have a case. So if all the soya beans were coming here, and we were making lots of money and doing whatever we are with soya beans, the case is strong. But I'm pointing out to you that in fact Argentina is the breadbasket for a lot of poor people. So I simply say that I think the way in which you phrase your conclusion cannot really be justified, and that's a challenge.
Well, I was not able to elaborate to everything else I elaborated if I have time to do that. I think there is an ideology of consumerism that is very much a part of life in the wealthy countries, very much so. I would say, you see, what is happening in China is a new fact. It's something very, very new, and that is that because of the economic development of the country, people are eating much, much more and much better. Interesting. Much of the soybeans that are exported from Argentina feed pigs. Feed pigs. Of course, the pigs are for feeding people. But the big corporations see in this not a benefit to the Chinese, a way to make money, plenty of money. And my whole argument is that right now, the king of the world is money. That is my thesis. And it's interesting that people who are not speaking from the perspective of an NGO or someone who is concerned about human rights and poverty and all that, but people who are, in fact, very attached to the market system are saying exactly the same thing. I was amazed a couple of years ago. I read a book by George Soros. You know George Soros. He's one of the greatest millionaires in the world. He has made plenty of money on the basis of the market. He has a whole book about the crisis of global capitalism. That's the title. The crisis of global capitalism. And his whole thesis is money has become the ruling power in the whole world. And that is destroying society. I think so. I believe so. I really believe so. Money controls everything. You know, sports, arts, industry, agriculture, you name it. Money, money, money. The maximization of gain. So, that is my thesis. And I see the results of that in terms of ecological destruction and in terms of the destruction of people in a wealthy country, Argentina.
Yes, Paul. Yep.
You mentioned about the three aspects of globalization. And I was just thinking of it, if we can look at religious communities across the globe, let's say the church, for example, is the evidence that multinational companies have taken advantage or even promoted globalization for their benefit is clear. But on the other hand, it seems that religious communities that are spread across the world also create a form of global community. And the potential for those global communities to engage with each other, these communities around the world to engage with each other, because they have a common foundation, if you like. So for the Christians, the Bible. What potential is there for that alternative global community to engage with and to counteract the negative influence of these multinational companies which are promoting globalization for their own benefit? So what I'm trying to say is there are the potential for these two communities, as it were. You talk about companies, we have the church as a parallel to that. You have the class, we can talk about the Christians. You have consumerism that brings everybody together. Here perhaps you can talk of the scriptures that bring religious communities together. So these two global communities, how can they engage, and particularly religious communities, to attend to such problems such as it seems that we have a similar resource, maybe not sufficient money, but a similar resource in terms of people and unity and so on.
You see, for the church really to fulfill its task in relation to the situation of globalization in the terms in which we have described that, the church will have to be very aware of what's going on and make sure that several of the basic principles of Christian ethics are applied to practical life. Like the principle of the care of creation, stewardship of creation, or the principle of solidarity with the poor, taking the side of the poor, defending those who are in a situation of need, making sure that there is justice established in the world, and doing everything possible in that direction. Unfortunately, oftentimes individualism is entrenched in the Christian communities. You see, one of the basic reasons why I participate in MyCan Network is precisely that I believe that the Christian community on a global scale has something to do with this. The MyCan Network associates almost 300 churches and NGOs, Christian NGOs, service agencies around the world. And the idea is to try to encourage the church to realize that we are a global community, but we are responsible not only to preach and preach and preach and preach. We must make sure that our concern for justice is a basic element, and it becomes not only a basic element in our theology, but in our practical life. The whole question of stewardship, responsible stewardship, not just exploitation of natural resources, but care of God's creation, care of God's creation. You see, I oftentimes say, what would happen if in every country, every local church became really, really what it should be, according to biblical principles? If it so to say, incarnate kingdom principles, love, justice, concern for creation, what would happen? I think it would really make a tremendous, tremendous difference. It would be a spiritual revolution. A spiritual revolution. I think the potential is there. Unfortunately, I don't know what the situation is in Asia. I know the situation in Latin America pretty well. Oftentimes the churches are very isolated from reality. Very isolated from the situation of the country. Very concerned about my well-being. In Latin America we have the growth of Protestant communities. It's an amazing growth by leaps and bounds. You know, traditionally Latin America has been Roman Catholic. In many ways the Roman Catholic Church has been suffering for the last 3 decades or so because of shortage of vocations, because oftentimes the hierarchy has been associated with the powers that be, dictators and so on. Unfortunately, that has been the case. And so as a result, the Roman Catholic Church has been losing people. Not everybody becomes a member of an evangelical Protestant church. There are many sects and other religious movements. Most of the Latin Americans are associated with some kind of religious movement. But oftentimes there's tremendous lack of teaching in the church life. There's the preaching of the so-called prosperity gospel, which is a reflection of what we have been talking about, you know, the consumer society. God becomes your partner and you're becoming wealthy. It's a question of faith. And that is very, very sad. You cannot expect much from people who are so concerned about their well-being in isolation from what is going on around them. And so my concern is to see that the church really is what God wants it to be. A community where you practice justice. You practice the care of creation. There is a sense of solidarity with one's neighbor. And every effort is made to see that the gospel is applied to practical life.
Well, interesting. Do you just want to come back and reflect on the Indian situation at all, or tell us something about that? I mean, it'd be quite interesting to compare continents in this way. I don't know if you want to do that, but
that was part of the reason why I asked, because because it is a global issue, and part of the world seems to be benefiting from that, including the church within that part of the world, and the potential for countries like India and China. It's always in the discussion, the growth in the economy and so on, and in the next 10 years, pollution and everything else is going to grow there, although at this point you can't compare with the West. And so the potential, that was my concern, the potential to be able to work with people both in the Western world and in the developing world to address problems that we will down the line, sooner rather than later, face. And I think that is, seems to be the two powers of globalization, economics and then religion. One can really, that would seem to me one way of attending to the problem, particularly from where I am standing.
You see, to be an example that should be illustrative of what could happen in terms of global solidarity is what happened in the wealthy countries, especially in Britain, with Jubilee 2000, was it? Jubilee 2000. Of course, it was not all that one would desire in terms of results, but it was a way to show solidarity across borders, solidarity with the poor in other countries. You see, much of the damage is caused by foreign policy of the wealthy countries, especially the US, sorry to say, especially the US. Foreign policy. In this country and in any wealthy country, member of the G8, one of the best contributions that people could make, Christians could make, is to praise the governments to have just foreign policies. Just foreign policy. You see, much of the corruption in Latin America, and I'm sure that is true in Asia, in Africa, is not just local corruption. It's international corruption. Corruption of big corporations. I wish there were time to elaborate that. There are studies made of the way in which foreign companies, banks, cooperate with big corporations to really buy politicians in the two-thirds world. Buy them. Now, who is more corrupt? The one who receives pay to approve a law that is not just, or the one who pays? Who is more corrupt? No, it's just equally corrupt. And that is the problem. Corruption is a big problem. And it has to do with money. For the sake of money. I mean, Argentina has a fantastically big debt. $146,000 million. To serve that debt, I think it's about 1/4 of the budget for the country. To serve the debt. How can that be? Now, you try to find out, there are studies made of the way in which the debt was contracted. It's just amazing, really amazing. There is a Nobel Prize economist who has written quite a bit on that. He is authorized to write on the subject because he was vice president of the World Bank. He worked with the International Monetary Fund. He was one of the advisors to Clinton during his presidency. I'm talking about Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize, okay? Nobel Prize. He knows what he's talking about, although he has been criticized by people who are for the system, economists who are defending the system. Market, 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 market. That's the solution for everything. Now, Joseph Stiglitz was in Argentina after the tremendous collapse we had there. At the end of 2001, I mean, really, really, you can't imagine what happened in Argentina. I saw with my eyes people, middle-class people, professional people, living out on the street. They lost their home, they lost their job, there they were. I mean, thousands of people, thousands of people. Now, many in Argentina have European roots. Italian, Spanish, Polish, Ukrainian, you name it. About 80,000 families left within days. Some of them could claim Italian citizenship, Spanish citizenship. A lot of professions, a lot of professions. What happened? You see, the whole question was the movement of the financial system to preserve private interest. Private interest. Stiglitz came right after that. I was amazed at what he said in a series of lectures that he gave at the School of Economics at the University of Buenos Aires. He said, Argentina should not pay this debt. Should not pay this debt. Why? Because it's immoral, because it's illegal, and I can prove that. You see, the people who signed the papers for the debt, for the loans, were military dictators with no approval on the part of Congress or anything. There was no Congress. They signed the approval, they signed the papers. Much of the money, under the mentorship of the International Monetary Fund, ended up in private accounts in Switzerland or somewhere else, one of those paradises, The country didn't really benefit from that. That is corruption. That is corruption. And that is the beginning of the history of the big debts of Argentina, which is still being paid. I mean, not the debt, the interest are being paid. Year after year, Argentina has borrowed more money to pay interest, not the principal. That is corruption. Corruption for the sake of money. Stiglitz said, don't pay the debt. It's illegal, it's immoral, and it's unpayable. It's unpayable. So, you see, I'm not Argentine. I love Argentina. I have become very attached to that country. Two of our children were born there. We have lived over 40 years there. I ate for Argentina. When we arrived in 1967, it was not a paradise, but it was really a wonderful country in many, many ways in terms of education. First-rate education, free, health care, the possibility of a vacation for every common worker, and so on. Far above any other Latin American country. Even today. All our children got their education in free public schools. Public fee means something different here. It's not private. It's government schools. Healthcare, excellent. Today, our grandchildren have to go to private schools if they can, because the educational system has been destroyed. Much of the industry was destroyed. The health system, this government is trying to, reconstruct the country. I have my own criticism of the government. I don't think it goes far enough in terms of the care of creation, in terms of land reform and so on. But my goodness, they have done a wonderful piece of work to at least pick up a bit the economy of the country. And they are trying to do more. The problem is how to do it with so much opposition on the parts of wealthy landowners, wealthy people.
Yes, question. Yes.
Excuse me. If I may share the Malaysian experience in this scenario. Malaysia used to be one of the world's largest producer of palm oil, rubber, led to basic agricultural communities. But in the early stage, what the government did was to open up forests and resettle poor people to these large areas and build houses, basic education, basic infrastructure in that large deforested area. So in that sense, it also helps the poor and helps the country. So in that spirit, I think the church would be more meaningful if they work for some model of that nature. That is my suggestion. I mean, to encourage Christians to NGOs, to government connections, whatsoever, to base on some sort of that model.
You see, a big question is what is the political and economic task of the church? The church is not in charge. Thank God.
Sure.
I don't believe in this close association of the church with the state. I don't. Maybe because I come from another tradition. But, you see, at the basis of the whole problem is a moral issue. I really, really agree with what Michael said. In the moral climate, because you see, where there is materialism, where there is individualism, there is a moral climate that has to be changed. You see what is affecting the ecological situation and the question of poverty is a moral climate. When people are sold to consumerism, concerned about their own benefits, their own good, no way to have a society where justice and care of creation prevail. You have to change the moral climate. There is the task of the church. The church has to change the moral climate. I think Britain has a wonderful illustration, at least I think so. Maybe I idealize what happened with the revivals in the 18th century with Wesley and the consequences of social and economic consequences of that. I mean, to me, that is a wonderful illustration of what needs to happen again and again in every country. Really, the figure of Wilberforce to me is a very meaningful figure. You know, he's an amazing politician who refused to accept political power. He did not want to be a politician. He felt compelled to do so because, well, he came to the conviction that this was God's call. And my goodness, did he ever make a difference in terms of the abolition of slavery and all of that. Applying faith to his political career. That's what we need. I think there is much that could be done in the wealthy countries on the part of the church to influence international politics, foreign policy. Perhaps that would be the best contribution to be made, the most important contribution to be made, so that there is justice on an international level, so that there is less corruption. Let's not say corruption is eliminated, I wish it were, but at least less corruption, much less corruption, so that somehow big international companies are not able to do whatever they please. Banks are not able to do whatever they please. You see, it's interesting how some of the banks in the West, Switzerland, mainly the US, become money savers for wealthy, dishonorable people. Some of the dictators in Latin America. Make sure their money is deposited there, gaining good interest. And of course, the wealthy countries benefit from that.
It would be really interesting, since we have a very international group here, if anyone could give us some illustration from your own country, or perhaps something you've been involved in, where you've been able to influence government policy in some way, or been involved in a campaign in a government policy decision-making process, perhaps on a committee or something. I don't know if anyone has experiences that kind, and it would be quite interesting. So I think it's a very practical session. It's a workshop. So, if anyone... Yes, you too.
I don't know if there's some organizations in other countries, but in the United States we have Bread for the World, which is a Christian citizens movement, which does a number of things, but annually has offering of letters from people to their representatives in Congress to work on world hunger issues. Sometimes it's for domestic hunger, sometimes it's for international. And they've had, they haven't solved everything, but they do believe they've had positive influence. And most recently this year, our offering letters have to do with encouraging our Congress to develop food aid that would help work towards the millennium goals I think you were referring to.
Yeah.
And so that's one small example.
I think there are wonderful examples.
Anyone else have any other examples like that from your country? Okay, we have a few more minutes. Yes, a question you like? No, yes.
I've sometimes wondered with the problem with debts, loans made to regimes and countries burdened with those debts for a long time, whether it be wise to sort of campaign for bankruptcy provisions as you have for individuals and for companies, so that banks are very careful about who they lend to, because if they overextend and it can't be paid back, the loans, provision for the loan to get written off. And whether there might be an appropriate campaign to have some provision for countries to be set free from the burdens of debt after a period of 10 years or so through a kind of bankruptcy procedure, because that would make the banks very wary of their lending decisions.
I have read quite a bit of the whole question of Argentinian foreign debts. There has been a lot of research done into that. And there are people who are suggesting exactly that. I don't know whether that is really possible, to have some kind of international bankruptcy law. But the fact is that some of these countries really suffer because a lot of their money has to go to pay it. And I think that is such a pity, such a tremendous pity. Which means also, you see, if you study the figures, some of the wealth of the wealthy countries, dare I say, where does it come from? The history of Latin America is that, first the Spanish Empire, tons and tons and tons of gold and silver were sent to Spain. I mean, tons. That was not to the benefit of people in Latin America, the aborigines.
Sorry, yes, do you want to come in and then we can... Yes, is that on the same topic? Yes.
You raised quite rightly the core issue of moral leadership, really. And we've seen the world in more recent times with Christians who have been leaders of the main nations. Well, certainly in the Western Hemisphere. We take Bush, for example. We can't doubt that these people are Christians. We've seen Blair in this country, no question that he's been a Christian. So one could argue, you see, that to influence, one should encourage people to go into politics and to go through the system. So I just point out to you that here are two individuals who have reached the pinnacle of power in two of the leading countries, and I'm sure there are other examples. Well, one would be hard-pressed to say that the world has seen a lot of justice as a consequence of the leadership of Christian leaders. I'm not saying there hasn't been some justice, but by and large I think history is going to say this was not a period in which we saw a great move forward in justice. So that seems to demonstrate that Christians, when in positions of power, cannot produce justice. Now that's a very hard thing to say, but the hard evidence is there. So either it's because they are morally faulted, well, we're all morally faulted, or that having come into those positions of power, the powers that are there, the hidden forces, are so powerful that in fact it is no longer possible to control them. So I just point out these hard realities that Christians have not proven themselves able to produce justice.
I fully agree with you. 100%. You see, morality is not a question of power. I mean, there are people who I have no reason to say, you know, who is not a Christian. Or I have no right to say that. God, he will have to answer God. I mean, he will be judged by God. I know that his politics has nothing of Christian, nothing Christian about it, nothing Christian about it. You see, it's not enough to call yourself a Christian or to be a Christian who goes to church, prays before meals especially. Not enough. You have to have a Christian mind. You have to have Christian ethics and look for a way to put into practice your Christian ethics in whatever field you are, whether it's politics or academic, in academic field or whatever. You see, there is a defective kind of discipleship in many churches, in most churches I would say. There is no teaching of Christian ethics. I understand discipleship as the following of Jesus Christ and according to his teaching, applying his teaching, learning to obey everything that he commanded. And that includes Christian values. One's attitude towards wealth, for instance. You know, Jesus had a lot to say about wealth. A lot of his teaching has to do with wealth. And a lot of his teaching has to do with power. The use of power. He who wants to be first, he has to learn to serve, for instance. So I think that the effective teaching in our churches of the time, effective teaching, if there were more concern to permeate society from the basis, from the bottom up.
So do you think the teaching, do you think the teaching of the churches, when we're in a theological college here, I'd love to know what they're teaching these young people and all the older people here who see it all the lanes, whether they're really teaching them about justice or doing a bit of pastoral care in the local parish. I mean, I'll bet you when we get down to it, this college itself is not a great pusher of ethics in the way that you are outlining. Is this true or not?
I think we're going to bring in someone who's a local theologian
I'm
here.
afraid I have to comment on that specifically because in the Easter term I taught a course in this college and it was on the prophet Amos. And I can really assure you that the students who are in my class are in no doubt that I think Amos is a prophet for the 21st century. But I actually agree that so often sort of what we might call spiritual aspects of Christian formation and perhaps true in other religions as well get divorced from the nitty-gritty, how this works out.
What you are doing is a recent thing. I mean, if we take the college, we take this college because we happen to be here, but we take all the colleges in this country in the religious area. If we went back, how many years ago was it they managed to get this, what you're doing, on the agenda? Is this a more recent innovation, or has it been going on a long time? Because we've got all these priests out there, how many of them really understand what they should be doing?
I can't speak for theological education in general, and I only have, I just came in and did this one sort of 8 hours of teaching. My suspicion is, and other people may be able to comment more, is that as issues surrounding social justice have come higher up the sort of awareness of people in the last, perhaps, I don't know how many years in this country, so they've come into sort of theological education. The thing that I think now needs to be addressed is the same thing with regard to ecological issues in a broader sense, and actually that is starting to happen as well. But my own personal sort of desire would be to see that everybody who's training for any kind of Christian ministry had exposure to the kind of stuff that we're doing this weekend about sort of the importance of environmental issues in the bigger perspective. That's not there yet, I don't think, but it hopefully is coming.
There's a lot of hands. We had one hand halfway down who's been waiting. Sorry, I think you had your hand up earlier. Yes, yes. Did you still want to come in at this point, or?
Yes, I was just adding one point.
Okay, yes, right, okay.
That
yes.
Religion, there are two dimensions to look at the religion. One is the religion as a collection of rituals, and the other is the religion as a constructive, positive force that can transform our paradigms, our attitudes in the society. I think man has proved to be very tough. Religion, I think what we do is that instead of taking religion just as a label and compartmentalizing the humanity into various compartments, why not we take religion as a force that unites the people, and then from the bottom of the heart, not just as a label. And that is how I think we can do. The religion has a role. Of course, the country I belong to, Pakistan, generally when we talk that religion has a role, people say, oh, religion is outdated. How can religion is just you pray and offer rituals, but when we come across the practical problems like environment, ecology, and biodiversity, then people say, oh, religion has nothing to do with this. So I think these are the issues globally we are facing.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. If you go to the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, you find that the tendency seems to be in the human heart to separate religion from ethical living. Really, you find tremendous passages in the prophets. I think, for instance, of Isaiah 58. It's a very, very clear illustration of the message of the prophets, who say, don't separate ritual, religion, from ethics, especially from the question of justice. Don't separate that. God is not looking for rituals. He wants justice. He wants justice. And I believe that is a basic issue that has to be coped with. Not only politicians like the ones that have been mentioned. It's a general tendency in people's lives, in our lives, to separate ritual from ethics. And that is very unfortunate.
No, we have quite a host of hands going. Yes.
Are we not in the same way doing some separation here? Ecology and economics. When you talk of caring for nature and the poor, it's as though the poor are not part of nature. We have to care for nature separately and care for the poor separately. I thought it's the same thing.
Man is part of that nature. Man is both the subject and the object of nature care. No, I would not separate. I would keep the two together. And precisely that is the problem. But what affects God's creation in terms of material things, material resources, natural resources, affect people at the same time. You see, that is what we have seen. You cannot separate them. You can distinguish them. You can distinguish. I'm not a stone. I'm not a vegetable. I'm a person. And I'm distinguishable from this or whatever. But at the same time, you see, I belong to God's creation, and every aspect of God's creation has to be taken care of. People and things.
There's a question right at the back, lady at the back in the row.
I just wanted to talk about theological education a little bit. I trained at Westcott House, which is part of the Cambridge Theological Federation, of which this college is a part. And I do know that in our college, every Thursday night, we didn't have a proper meal. We had the community-made soup, and the money that would have been spent on that meal was given to charity. And each term, people would choose, there'll be an international, a national, and a local charity that money would be given to. So I would say that social justice, and in a sense, is part of the heart of community life. And I suspect whatever college you went to, you would find an awful lot of formal and informal connections, and that's true of most parishes that I'm involved with and know of. They have real and rooted connections with missionary and giving organisations, but also building of schools in linked parishes. So there is a lot going on, but I would agree that it needs to be more coordinated, and we really need to work harder at supporting and sustaining that and organising it, and also spreading, communicating what's happening so people do know. And I just feel like I had to say that very strongly, that it is a strong part of formation.
I think, if I can just add a little point, I mean, one thing I think the church should be doing, and I'll just speak as a person in the church in Cambridge, is training people, exactly as Rene was saying, in ethics, but then sending them into Parliament, sending them into the political system, but people who really understand ethics. And the level of ethical debate, I'm sorry to say, I'm on camera, in our Parliament is extremely low level. And if you just had some people in there who actually had some formal training, as well as the passion, for real ethics and how to tackle ethical issues, and those would be people with political power, I think that would be a huge assistance for us. Now, we've got quite a few more hands going up, and we've got maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and I think we again could go here at the front and then back again, so we'll have 2 questions, and then I think we'll break for coffee. Yes.
Just to comment on theological education, I think most church leaders that I've had to do with are quite comfortable with social justice issues, so poverty and remediation of poverty. When you get into creation and ecology, they tend to back off because most of them don't come from scientific backgrounds, and they're very wary of making statements that are seen as scientific statements because they don't think, if they get questioned by their congregations, they'll be able to say, back up what they're saying. So they're very wary of venturing into some of those areas, and I think that is an area where people like us who are scientists and Christians or religious believers have a chance to have an impact in our churches. So it's not just about the leaders, it's about everybody in the church, I think, contributing to that discussion and debate and education.
We have at the back, by the way, Ruth Bankovitz, who is developing packs of materials which will educate churches in the general science and faith area, and which will include stuff on the environment and many other issues. And so we're very much concerned about that issue. And I think her materials will be a fantastic resource for that. Last question. Yeah. Yes.
First of all, I'd like to apologize when I asked my first question that I didn't greet you with shalom. and to tell you how much I appreciated the material you presented and your theological perspective. And I wanted to share something from our Jewish tradition, of which you quoted extensively because it's our common tradition. On this question of ethics and ritual. So in Hebrew we say that there are 2 vectors. Ben Adam leMakom, between man and God. Ben Adam leChavero, between man and other people. So it sets up, if you want, as a cross, these two orthogonal vectors. And it seems that there's always this struggle between, well, my ritual, my church, my synagogue, things that between me and God, and what I do outside between people. But what I wanted to share with you is that the term in Hebrew, ben adam makom, for between man and God, the word that's chosen is this word makom, as a pseudonym for God, which means the place. And I think that the tradition is actually trying to collapse these two vectors into one point, which is, where is God? It's right here, right now, right between the way I carry out my daily relationships with other people. That is the ritual at the core of religion, which I believe is what the Prophet Micah is actually saying. That is what it's all about.
Yeah.
So I wish you shalom, and I really thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good.
Well, I don't know about you, I find this a great session, really interesting. It's great to hear everyone's different perspectives as well. That's such a huge advantage, having people from lots of parts of the world, and it's fantastic. So let's really thank Rene for